Hello and welcome to the Ourdadsstamps YouTube channel, where we talk about all things related to stamps and stamp collecting. My name's Pete West and I'd like to thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoy it, and if you do, please click on the like button and don't forget to subscribe to get regular updates of new content. So hello again from Ourdadsstamps YouTube video. And today, once again, we are joined by Sheila, who joined me on a trip to Stanley Gibbons a few weeks ago. So hello, Sheila.
So hi, Pete. So what are we talking about?
Well, we're going to talk about the trip to Stanley Gibbons.
Okay.
And in particular, our visit to see the 1 cent Magenta, of which I am a very small stakeholder. We were staying in London for the Stampex stamp show, of which I did a video podcast a couple of weeks ago. But whilst we were there, we decided that we'd have a couple of days in London and take a trip to the Stanley Gibbons shop in the Strand. I wasn't sure whether we'd get the chance to see the 1 cent Magenta, but yes, it was there, it was on display, and had a very nice chat to a guy called Jamie from Showpiece, who gave us a talk, showed us around and told us what was happening. So what did you think of the stamp, Sheila?
Well, I have to say I was very impressed with the way it was displayed, and I think it was really nice to talk to one of the guys from Showpiece and talking about what they're trying to do, and one of their major purchases, if not the most major, was the 1 cent Magenta.
Yeah, yes. It is very nicely displayed for those of you who don't know, in a glass cabinet under dimmed lighting, but still bright enough for you to be able to see. I know I've said this before, but in all honesty, it's not a particularly attractive stamp. However, it is the most expensive thing on earth by weight, so it was impressive to see. And you rightly said that Jamie was very knowledgeable and very interested in what he said, and showed us around Showpiece. Showpiece are a company that plans to promote public ownership, if you like. They did it with the 1 cent Magenta, where basically sold share ownership to the general public. Stanley Gibbons own, I think it's about a third or 3/8 of the actual stamp, and we'll keep that ownership, but the rest is sold in lots to the public. And as I said, I own one of them, and I think there's another 50,000 out there, but they are still available on the Showpiece. However, they're also trying to expand it to other areas of interest and other valuable items. And at the moment, they have 4 items which you can buy shares in. And we were lucky enough to see 2 of the originals. One of them is an Andy Warhol portrait of the Queen. But you can go on Showpiece's website, of which I'll put a link in, and buy shares in that if that's your thing. There's also a 1937 Edward VIII penny, which was never actually issued but was minted. Once again, that was there. We saw the actual penny, and you can buy shares in that. And another one that they had just acquired was Charles Darwin's Origin of the Species, the first edition. Once again, a valuable item, and to have a share ownership, I think it's a good idea, and it's something they're trying to do and looking to expand on. And they're actually after ideas of what other things people would be interested in share owning. So if you have any ideas, log on to their website and let them know.
Because when we went, they had a wall, and it was sort of separated into different sections. One would have been like memorabilia, another one was fashion, I think another one was like cars, that type of thing. And you just took a little card and you put your ideas up of things that they would try and pursue. Yes,
that's right. Did you put an idea up?
I think I put about one of the very rare Birkin handbags, the Hermes Birkin handbags.
Mm-hmm. Very good. I've got my wish with the stamp, so I'm very happy to own it and very happy to have seen it. And being honest, if I was hugely rich enough to buy that stamp outright, you wouldn't see any more of it than I saw at Stanley Gibbons, because I couldn't keep it at home because of security issues. You can't look at it every day in normal light because it would damage the stamp. So I probably wouldn't get, if I did own the whole stamp, I probably wouldn't see it any more often than I'm able to now when it's on display.
Yeah, but I think this is very typical of high value items. If you think of the art world, a lot of people have bought these amazing paintings. They're not going to have them on display at home because of security.
Yeah.
So they're probably in some bank vault somewhere, and maybe they go and look at them once or twice a year.
Yes, that's right. And I mean, for me, that's the whole point of having a stamp collection, is to be able to look at it. And yes, my stamp collection isn't worth millions, but I'd like to think it's fairly decent. And I do get pleasure out of looking at it. So that's the whole point of having it for me.
But the Showpiece were telling us they had just missed out on purchasing the James Bond's car.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, the original DB4, was it? Or DB5?
It was
DB5, yeah.
It?
Yes, so that would have been quite fun. Anyway, I think Showpiece is an interesting company. We were also introduced to the MD, actually. Aaron Carter was there, and had a chat with him, who explained the whole processes and what goes on. Very friendly and open. As I said, if you get the chance to go to Stanley Gibbons, go up and have a chat with these guys. They're really interesting. I wanted to talk a bit more about the 1 cent Magenta, because that's really what we're all interested in the stamps. There's a lot of history involved in it, and a lot of interesting stories. For those of you that don't know, British Guiana is, or was, a British-owned colony on the northern coast of South America. And all along that coast, parcels of land were owned by the Spanish, the French, the Dutch, the Portuguese. Just about everybody had some part of that land there. And Britain acquired a large chunk and called it British Guiana. It is now independent and known as Guyana. When it was British Guiana, it was there for sugar plantations, and made Britain very, very rich, or some Britons very rich, by selling the sugar. And in about the 1850s, they started producing stamps. Initially, they were quite crude stamps with really just writing on a coloured piece of paper. But eventually they asked Waterloo and Sons to produce their stamps for them, which they did fairly successfully. Unfortunately, in 1855, the postmaster in British Guiana ordered 100,000 more stamps to keep the stocks flowing so that they could keep the post office going. But only 10,000 of them arrived. So they ran desperately short of stamps. And rather than risk having no stamps at all, he authorised the local printing company, which was actually the local newspaper, the Royal Gazette, to print an emergency run of stamps. And they went back to the original type to just have a coloured piece of paper with British Guiana written on it in words, postage and the value on the side. And there was a 1 cent Magenta, which was used for inland newspapers. There was a 4 cent Magenta and a 4 cent Blue, which was used for letters. Now, the 1 cent Magenta, because it was only used for newspapers, was not widely used and tended to be thrown away. People just ripped the cover off and chucked the wrapping away. And so only one of them has survived. And that is what makes this such a valuable stamp. Originally, nobody knew of its existence. It wasn't until nearly 20 years after they went out of print. They were only used for about 8 weeks until the new stock of stamps arrived. So you can see why they're quite rare. But it wasn't until nearly 20 years later that a 12-year-old schoolboy was going through his uncle's collection. The boy named Louis Vaughan came across this stamp that he didn't recognise. It wasn't in any of the catalogues that he'd got. He had no idea what it was, but kept it anyway. And after about 5 or 6 months trying to work out what it was, he decided to sell up. He gave up and sold it for 6 shillings to a British stamp dealer. The British stamp dealer, Neil McKinnon, his name was, kept it for a little while. About 5 years later, sold it on to someone else. And gradually it became realised that this was a very rare stamp indeed, and was recognised as being the only copy of the 1 cent Magenta, and in fact still is the only copy of the 1 cent Magenta. And it's passed through many famous people's hands. The French aristocrat Philip von Ferrari, who is very well known in stamp circles as possibly having the best ever stamp collection, bought it for an undisclosed sum, but it's believed to have been round about £40, which was a fair amount of money at the time, but not a huge sum. When he died in 1917, he intended to leave his collection to the Postal Museum in Berlin. However, it was confiscated by the French government as part of Germany's war reparations and sold on in a series of auctions. And an American millionaire, Arthur Hind, bought it for $32,500. And he reportedly outbid 3 kings for that stamp, including George V of Great Britain, which shows just how much it had gone up in value in that small amount of time. It then passed on to a couple of other people before ending up with a guy called John E. DuPont, who was heir to the DuPont Chemicals fortune. Now, this bloke's quite interesting. He was an avid stamp collector, and he bought the 1 cent Magenta and was owner of it for about 30 years. However, he was convicted of murder in 1997, went to prison, and whilst he was in prison, the stamp was kept in a private safe somewhere. But he died in prison, so the estate then had to sell it off. So we have the ownership going from a 12-year-old boy to one of the most famous stamp collectors in the world to a convicted murderer. And finally, the last owner before Stanley Gibbons got it was a shoe designer.
Stuart Wiseman.
Called Stuart Wiseman, who I know you, Sheila, have done a podcast about him.
I have, yes.
If you're interested in Stuart Wiseman's ownership and his shoes, then have a listen to Sheila's podcasts. Stuart Wiseman decided to sell it recently, and Stanley Gibbons bought the stamp and decided to have it as a share ownership scheme, which is where we are today. And as I said, I'm very glad to say that I have one of the shares in the stamp. There are still some available. There's now a scheme with Showpiece where if you bought shares in it, you can now sell them on a marketplace. I haven't looked at the details because I don't intend to sell mine, but presumably there's some sort of commissions involved. But you can pick them up there. I think you can still get them from Showpiece itself. So if that takes your interest, then have a look on their website. I will put all the links for Showpiece website and Stanley Gibbons on the notes. So please have a look. I hope you found that a bit interesting. A bit of history about the stamp and a look at Showpiece and their products. So thank you for listening, and we'll see you again in a couple of weeks' time. Thank you for listening to the podcast. I hope you found it interesting and enjoyable. Don't forget you can visit my online stores at eBay and Delcamp under the name of Ourdadsstamps, where I have over 2,000 items for sale. Please join us again in 2 weeks' time for another edition of Ourdadsstamps podcast.